Hello and welcome back. MC1 Gamer here, bringing you a kind of a response video to the topic of the week and a video that Vince Venturella had put out. I'm sure that plenty of people are going to be weighing in on this. Vince Venturella, who is the co-host with Tom Lyons for Warhammer Weekly, among many other forms of content that Vince produces. He puts out a weekly, thought-provoking topic, which usually gets everybody to join in and put out either response videos like this one, or just comment on the video and discuss a variety of different concepts. And this is one that is a debate that's I think is kind of a throwback to a debate that has occurred with Warhammer in general as new editions have come out and old models have been phased out. But this is a bit of a different animal. Age of Sigmar is a bit different. And I wanted to put out a video in response to his. He put out his initial one on Friday, which he usually does. And then he put out his own response to this morning with his concepts and ideas on what he thinks the solution should be and what the problem is in general. Well, not even what the problem is, but what the debate is, what the thing that people are talking about and why. What's their opinion and his ideas. And he's got some interesting ideas and some interesting solutions, but I'm going to weigh in on that. I'm going to use his video kind of as the basis too, because he puts out some bullet points. I want to go hit each one, point by point. And I put the links down below in the notes, so you should be able to see not only his original topic of the week, but this particular video as well. I encourage you to watch both of them. Vince always has good points to put in, even if you disagree with them. Sometimes I do. Sometimes he disagrees with me. But for the most part, we're of similar minds about things. It's definitely worthy of going to watch that. I invite you to go watch either or both of those, specifically this one, before coming back and watching this. But if you're here live, thank you first of all for doing that and taking the time out of your day to do that. But if you're here live already, go back and watch that if you haven't seen it already. So, again, the debate with the Compendium Scrolls revolves around the idea that some of these scrolls are throwbacks to an older edition of Warhammer, which they are. I mean, Age of Sigmar, when it launched, created an entire array of Compendium Scrolls that bridged the gap from the end of 8th edition into Age of Sigmar. If you're new to Age of Sigmar, you haven't played it, you might wonder what these Compendium Scrolls are. That's what they were. They were existing armies that were individual army books with their own rules and special characters, and they had unique rules to themselves. And while it may seem that Age of Sigmar has similarities to that, the difference is, especially when Age of Sigmar launched, that Age of Sigmar had no real army books. Even now, the battle tomes are not army books like they were in 8th edition. They're really a collection of war scrolls and battalion scrolls, even some which give you special rules, but they're defining a sub-faction. They're fleshing out a sub-faction, meaning that if you were playing Order and you want to play Stormcast, these are Stormcast-specific rules, but that doesn't mean you can't take those scrolls and merge them with any number of other Order units. And in some cases, those mergings, those generic Grand Alliance lists, can be, in some cases, more powerful. But there's nothing that forces you to do that. In the competitive sense, the old way of doing it was that if you had a Dark Elf book, you played Dark Elves. Could you play with High Elves or Wood Elves too? Sure, you could, but that was a much more definitive separation. And that changes certain things when it comes to how do we evaluate what is old and what is retired versus what is new and shiny. And I think that's going to weigh into a lot of my opinions. But, again, the conundrum here is that as Age of Sigmar starts evolving, and it really has, we've seen, the General's Handbook come out, changed a lot of the way people play, incorporated some more competitive rules, points, some balance issues, but not taking away the old style of play, even including a narrative way of playing, but left the open way of playing, which is what the game was intended to be. It was a lot of pressure and influence from people in the community, specifically some of the organized event structures like SCGT and others, that kind of made GW move in that direction. But it also had to do with the fact that a lot of legacy players, a lot of old guard players, left the game in some respects because they felt some abandonment. We've talked about this in ad nauseum, but a lot of them have come back. A good deal of them have come back, as well as a whole new wave of people. And even though Age of Sigmar seemed to be doing well, it certainly was doing it was doing better in terms of its growth than Fantasy was, because Fantasy was starting to die out over the course of many years. It certainly has massively resurged with some of the changes of the game, and with that in mind, Compendium Scrolls are starting to become an issue, and they really shouldn't be. I could see some of these points, but let's go over them. Let's talk about some of these things that Vince had talked about. So I'm going to go over some of his bullet points. Here's where he talks about the issue. His first point is that they represent characters and armies that people love, and they represent massive collections that people have. He uses Magic as an example throughout his this video, and there are some reasonable comparisons, but the parallels don't, the differences are much greater than the similarities. Insofar as you don't spend, when you open up a pack of Magic, you don't spend thousands of hours assembling the cards, converting them up the way you want to, painting them. There's a greater connection and certainly a greater impact in terms of what you bring to the table at an Age of Sigmar organized event, as opposed to opening some packs or even collecting, building up a collection with an organized, with a collector type game. And there's a lot of collector type games out there. There's HeroClix, there's all kinds of card games. There's not just Magic, but a wealth of them. And then there's other games like, for instance, Fantasy Flight's series of games, Armada and X-Wing. They don't have retirements, but maybe that'll come, who knows. But they're collector games insofar as that, sometimes you don't have access to some of those models. They kind of go out of print for a while because they try to keep up. But even so, the point is, we're talking about a different animal here. So some of these comparisons I think are very loose. I think they're at a very high level. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, you're really not having the same kind of impact with people that have spent time putting their heart, soul into, sometimes even blood in addition to sweat. If you're doing any converting with any Dremels or anything sharp, it can be blood too. But all that effort to actually bring a tournament-capable army. What you do at your local store is your own business. I mean, you could have all gray models. I hate that. A lot of us hate that. I'm a bad actor in that. I've been really trying over the last couple of years to change that with good influences from people like Vince. But you could play your entire hobby time just playing with gray models or prime models. Nothing's forcing you to paint. But if you want to go to an organized event, it's got to be painted. It's got to have at least some minimal level of quality. So you got to build it and you got to paint it. All right. So you're not just cracking open a box or a pack. So I don't really see I see what he's saying here. This is one of the positives, one of the benefits, one of the pros in favor of not trying to phase out the Compendium Scrolls. Let me kind of take a step back also. The issue is that some organized events, specifically SCGT, which is the Healer and Howard guys, they wanted to phase out and disallow Compendium Scrolls. These, as new armies and new war scrolls are introduced into the game, new releases, those are the bright new shiny things that everybody's really excited about. But there's a lot of old school armies out there that were given rules, given war scrolls, provided with battalions even that you could use when the Age of Sigmar first launched. And they're still legal. They even were included with point structures in the General's Handbook, which provided rules and a structure for organized play. So this concept of wanting to try to push these out and relegate them to the past, there are reasons and causes for them why people want to do that. I don't really agree with a lot of those reasons, but I want to explore that again because this is a great topic, and this is certainly something that comes up in a variety of conversations on videos that a lot of us do, and certainly even locally and throughout our gaming experience at local clubs. So yes, they represent characters and armies that people love, but there's a bigger investment than a lot of the explanation that Vince gives, and I think it's a bigger investment and connection to their collections than most other games You pop open a box of Monopoly or Risk. You're not, you didn't paint those figures. You didn't mold, the green stuff to fill in the cracks. You didn't convert them to look just the way you wanted to. There's a measure of connection and love that with what you've done. This has been mentioned many, many times. You spend a huge factor more in the assembling of your army sometimes than you do in actually playing with the armies on the table. There is a great deal of investment, basing, flocking, converting, planning, your paint schemes, whatever. Okay, moving on to the next point. Okay, so these things, the scrolls, they have some unique rules. Okay, in some cases, these unique rules are essential to build competitive lists. Right now, if you want to build a Duardin army, a lot of the stuff that makes that even remotely competitive, and it's not a top tier right now. They need new releases. We hear rumors about new releases, and if you're watching this way into the future and there's a new release, well, you know that this is an older video, but this is the truth right now. I've done several hundred videos on unlocking Age of Sigmar, and several of them have included lists that pull even since the GHB was released, the General's Handbook, pull compendium units and characters because they were needed to make them competitive. And the fact that they have, that they are essential in some ways to put them on par with a lot of these new armies is one compelling reason not to want to try to disallow them for some reason. Absent many of these scrolls, needed components are missing from many lists that allow them to compete in the sub-faction level. And I could put out whole bullet points on these examples, and maybe I'll do another video on that. But if you've built lists at any point through your history playing Age of Sigmar, I'm sure that you've looked at some of these units and you've seen some of the synergies, but some of these armies require it. They need it. They won't be able to stand up against the newer, more synergistic releases without some of that stuff. His next bullet point is these will grow over time. Yes, they will grow over time. As time goes on, he gave a great example of if they came for my Tomb Kings today, but, tomorrow they'll come for this, whatever it is. Yes, over time, things are going to get phased out. Absolutely. All units are phased out. It's not a matter of the forcing of it. It's an organic thing. It's a natural progression. People will buy the new shiny releases because they're new and they're shiny. They have cool new war scrolls, new mechanics. They may be battle tomes with their own battalions that give all kinds of special rules and synergies. They are cool looking models. In some cases, the older models may be metal, and these models are plastic, which means they can be bigger and they're not as heavy, and they have incredible sculpts. You want to buy the new stuff. And in a lot of cases, the power creep that we're seeing, and hopefully the power creep curve won't, go much more vertically than we're seeing with the last couple of releases. But the bottom line is that there is a power creep because, of course, GW wants to entice you to buy the new stuff, but you're going to buy the new stuff anyway. So, phasing out a format, will lead to a quicker loss of more and more of our collections, making them unplayable at organized events. Casual players mirror organized play and will more and more as social media grows and there's a display of what's called legal lists. So if you're seeing stuff on, like, say, for instance, Warhammer TV, and you're seeing the legal lists and you want to emulate that list because it was competitive and maybe it won or it did well, that's what you're going to go after in more cases than not if you're a newer player. But if you're pigeonholing just what's legal into that silo, then that's all you're going to buy. And there's a whole wealth of stuff for a greater and grander game. And I don't see any reason why you need to disallow that stuff. I think it makes it a better game. But be aware that that if you're going to start phasing stuff out, it may be, every unit is then going to be relegated to that retired category. And that could actually increase. And I'll go over that, the time factor. It could accelerate is what I should say. And I'll go over that in a later bullet point. Now, next point was about Warhammer TV. They record tournaments. If they win, players can't go and buy that army. This is a detraction. I agree with this. This is a problem from GW's standpoint. This is a business issue. They want to sell product. They are providing these services. They've said it themselves. They provide rules specifically just to support a fun play environment, but that's not really what they're about. They're about building great models. Now, a lot of us disagree with that. I kind of disagree, even though they're trying to, they're trying to divert. I say that there's a game attached to those models, even though they're cool models. But the bottom line is they're in the business of selling those models. Okay, they provide downloads, PDFs of the rules. In some cases, you have to buy it. And you have to buy these battle tomes, and with all the new rules. But the models are probably where they're making their biggest money. I'm almost sure of it. The bottom line is that if they're not producing something, they're not making the money off of that stuff. I get that, but all right, GW hasn't made this an issue. It's like organized circuits, like for instance SCGT. I'm not gonna, I don't want to harp on them. They're just one example. They're not alone in this. But then, this is an example that Vince used, and certainly they were involved in a lot of this discussion because they had an event where they wanted to disallow Compendium. So this is what what highlighted or accentuated this debate. GW hasn't said anything. It's not their bias. It's the bias of a smaller subset of the community and some TOs. And so it's not GW. These are the same groups, by the way, CGT and some of these other that did have influence in the first General's Handbook. We're seeing now, a lot of the dialogue about the next General's Handbook, but they were people that were involved and invited and gave input and probably had impact on the General's Handbook. And in some cases, many of us feel that there are aspects of the General's Handbook were overreaching, that were pulling back to 8th edition. Things that were very similar to even like SCGT's comp were incorporated. So they had influence on this. And so they're going to continue to have influence. But this is their idea of what they wanted, or they being, organized TOs that feel this way, of what they want the game to be or what they want the competitive climate to be. But that's not what the game has incorporated into its base rules. And even the GHB is an add-on that is going to evolve. So let's look back at history. Chaos Dwarves were always an exception they were an official army. They were a army that was brought about through Forge World, and I think they were initially, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, they were brought out in a White Dwarf with their own rules. But they became a legal army at organized events, and that worked. And yes, it did cause some complications where people might not have known the rules or been familiar with them. But it didn't cause a huge uproar. It was allowed. I don't even know any events that didn't allow it back throughout those days. So the compendium shouldn't be able to, it should and could also be allowed as well. I do not believe the compendium is causing the same uproar that even the Chaos Dwarves were when they weren't even an official list. They were kind of an add-on after the fact. This is legacy stuff you're pulling back from that people are trying to push to the side and kick to the curb. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. The armies being harder to get a hold of could result in bad experiences. They are rare. They represent a different era in the game. Okay. First of all, let me say, and I agree 100%, I've done tons of videos on the Compendium Scrolls when they first came out. Again, if you look at my video count, I'm getting close to 300. The vast majority of those are Age of Sigmar. I had probably under 100 before Age of Sigmar came out, if I remember correctly. Bottom line here is that TK, Team Tomb Kings and Brett's never been better. They've never been better. This is the best iteration of them both. Brett's, however, are nowhere near as competitive as Tomb Kings are. Tomb Kings probably overall are at the top of the heap or near the top of the heap. They're definitely in the upper, echelon of competitive, sub-factions. But most of the Compendium Scrolls are far less powerful than even the new releases. All right, there are a lot of reasons for this. First of all, there's nothing breaking the game like in the comparison that Vince mentioned, like for instance how Black Lotus or the Power of Nine had on Magic. There are literally game-breaking, and he admitted himself that two people of equal capability, if one person had and one person didn't have some of these incredibly powerful legacy cards that were unobtainable over time, that the person that had them almost always won. That is not the same equivalency in Age of Sigmar. Okay, there's nothing in the compendium, barring TK and Tomb Kings. Even then, is beatable. It's not undefeatable. It's not invincible. Okay, it's just very tough. It's a very rough list. Take that out. What's in the next stage of the hierarchy? Whatever's next is going to be the next big thing. It doesn't matter. It's just where they sit in the meta right now. And just because they're one example doesn't mean that the entire range of the compendium is that way. It isn't. In fact, many of these things are very underpowered compared to what not only their points, the adjusted rules. They have no special allegiance abilities, no sub-faction allegiance abilities. They got to pull only from the Grand Alliance allegiance abilities. They have a wealth of broken synergies now because of things like, they've lost battalions that they can't get access to anymore. They don't fit into the current keyword restrictions that GW has instituted with their FAQs and with the way that they're looking to build out war scrolls and how they synergize with each other going forward. These things are already in some cases being left behind and relegated to a lower powered capability. So the idea that they're somehow, going to change or detract from the experience, I don't think holds a lot of water. Could they be confusing to some players? Potentially, but the rules are available. Okay, the rules are still available. You could still download them. It's not like they're not available for people to find out. And if you're a true competitive player, you're looking to find out what everything does, because you don't know what you're going to go up against before you go into an event. So if you're that kind of a player and you have access to these rules, they're not being hidden behind some paywall or anything. You can go find them, and you probably already know them because you've probably been playing this game for a while. And even if you're new, it's easy to download those PDFs. So it's not like you don't have access to know what they're capable of. All right, so next point, the silly rules. Okay, the silly rules were involved in the initial launch because the game was not really built for competitive play. It was built for a casual beer and pretzel type game experience. That's why there were no points. There was, scenarios that kind of dictated everything. There was sudden death for, disparity in terms of, the army sizes where imbalance was embraced. All this stuff was changed with the General's Handbook. Compacts, compacts from various different organized events tried to rein some of that in because they wanted to create an organized event, an organized circuit, and they did a pretty good job of that. But the General's Handbook kind of came in and just was an overlay over that. But the silly rules that for the lady with the cup, or who has a bigger beard, or not kneeling, or making eye contact, or or whatever it is, doing whatever song and dance you are, that was I didn't like it, and most people don't like it, and it gets a little old, especially when you're doing it at the table. But that was GW's way of kind of showing that this was just a fun, casual game and not to take it too seriously. I think they went a little too far with it, but that was their style. And in fact, Age of Sigmar, these silly rules were incorporated into some of the initial GW scenario events that they rolled out to the various game stores. I actually ran one of those, and I actually participated in one. This is the one that had the Ice Queen in it, and they had these silly frozen jokes that could get you extra points. I cannot begin to tell you how many times people just said, "Ice to meet you." Oh my God. I mean, the collective groan across the room after like the 10th or 15th time was louder than anything else that you heard during that game session. And those silly rules were there because that was the idea and the climate of the culture of what Age of Sigmar was about in its initial launch. All right, they have taken a major step back from this. And I got to tell you, a lot of organized events do one of two things. Either they say, "Hey, you get those rules, you don't have to do a song and dance," or you better do it, otherwise you can't get those special rules. Either way, it's not like it's hurting the game that they're there. It's actually in some cases a hurdle if you have to go and achieve this stuff. Do your little dance your little jig in order to be able to get these special rules. Are they a little bit annoying? Sure, but they are an expression of what used to be in the game. And guess what? Some of these rules still exist in some of the existing War Scrolls that are not considered compendium. Like having your dice behind your back for Hand of Dust for Nagash, which is a hugely powerful ability. But are they going to now relegate Nagash to a compendium list because he has some kind of a silly rule where you're guessing which hand the die is in? I think that's obscenely ridiculous. Okay. Okay. So moving on to solutions. Let's go over to his solutions category, his solutions list. Now, for the solutions, he has some really good ideas. Let me move over to that. I want to try and follow this line of logic here. Okay. So solutions. His first one is do nothing. Okay. And what may come from just letting things go the way they are right now. Okay. This is my feeling, and I've already had this dialogue many times. there's zero reason to ban these compendium scrolls. This is my opinion. Here's why. Other than for business concerns, I don't feel that they need to be banned. Yes, GW, look, the only reason why is to force players to buy new stuff. That's the really only business reason GW would have to try and retire some of these old scrolls, because they're not producing, they're not actually producing those units. I get this. I can understand that tactic from a business perspective. It means that your only option and your only recourse for the competitive circuit is to be invested in the new models. All right, but there's definitely a trap in this, though. All right, I really dislike this strong arm method. GW hasn't said they're going to do this, but there's companies that do this, and there are serious ramifications as a result. It doesn't mean that it hurts the sales. It just means that there's only certain types of people that are interested in playing those types of games. But the game isn't hurt by supporting rules for the compendiums. It isn't. All right, they are easily available. They're just as available as the new releases, okay? Because they're out, they're free, and you can easily get them. The models are difficult to get in some cases. A lot of them are becoming more and more rare as they're not being readily produced. They're not sitting on store shelves. They're existing in collections that people have, or maybe you'll find them on stores that still have stock, or maybe on auction sites. But there's a finite amount of them, and they're going to start dwindling in terms of the percentage of people that are playing versus the people that are curring them, because as the game grows, there's more people playing and using other stuff. Sure, I get all that. All right, but in the same way as some of these units, some even that are resin, have been given repacks or rounds, they can still be played. All right, the idea for some of this was to take the metal and resin kits that are harder to maintain, that maybe even are no longer really producing good quality merchandise, are being phased out in favor of more plastic kits. But you still see some stuff in new packs, new kits that have some of these resin molds. You see them in the new Orc box with the Orc box, the new Beast Claw Raiders box, where the Hunter and the Frost Sabers, they're resin in there. If you looked at the any of the boxes, the collection box for Flesh Eater Courts, the Vargulf, that was resin. That was their fine cast. They included that in with the repacks with rounds, and they even included some squares with some of those. The bottom line is that they included them because they were legal war scrolls that they wanted to include, they wanted to put in there, but they didn't want to go and pull back the metal versions of those models of those war scrolls. And I venture to guess that probably over time those will even get phased out, because they're not making new plastic versions of them, unfortunately. But there they are. They probably have a stockpile, and when they run out, they'll say, "Well, we're no longer in production with these," and then then whatever tiers that we have in terms of what's allowed and disallowed, if there are any, in organized play, we'll use that as a guide. And I hope that doesn't come to pass, but we'll see what the ramifications are, both positive and negative, as I go through this. All right. But, the idea is that the phasing out, it's always going to happen. Players will always buy the new shiny new stuff, and in many cases, in abundance. But it's the alienation of these possessions that causes the problem. It won't hurt GW sales, because the new shiny stuff is always going to be far more interesting in look and in effect on the table. So all maintaining the Compendium Scrolls does is keep the old guard in the loop and keep them engaged with the game and more likely to buy the new products, because they're involved. They're involved in Age of Sigmar. If they leave the game, certainly they're not going to be involved. If there's stuff that they've already got and have to start over, less likely to stay involved with Age of Sigmar, which is what we've seen. A lot of old guard have left. A lot of them have returned because they see all the new cool stuff that's out and they want to get involved in the game, and they use some of their old stuff and whatever new great releases there are. So, but let me just establish here, for the record, Games Workshop did not say that legacy armies will only be playable during the transition, because we're kind of past the transition. They specifically said you can always play your old armies, and we are. So even if it's just some of the units or characters, we're playing them. We're doing them right now. That's their stance. This is being derived from a subset of the community, a subset that has influence, because in a lot of ways they're TOs or they're competitive players that are out there in the public. They're known, they're well-known players, and they have a voice, they have an opinion, and they're expressing it. And certainly there's plenty of voice that's being made and expressed over websites and forums. So, the louder voices tend to be the one that gets heard most. But overall, this is not an issue that has been created by GW. This is an issue that's been created by a segment of the community. All right. So my feeling is there's zero reasonable reasons to stop allowing them in match play. Over time, new editions have always come out that phased out stuff. So I expect that even new releases that, one day, will be old hat and replaced by something new that's shiny. The stuff that we see now is eventually going to become old, and then new stuff is going to come out. It's just an organic process. All right. Just like new editions of Warhammer Fantasy, they came out with, third, fourth, fifth, whatever. And those editions had new rules, new ways of building your army list, a lot of times new models, and some stuff got left out. You couldn't use, Arkin in his 4-skeleton chariot and clowny-faced Nagash, in successive versions of Undead. You couldn't use certain units until a new book came out with new rules, with new stats that were compatible with the new version of the game. We're going to see stuff like that in Age of Sigmar, a little bit different because it's a little bit different structure of the game, but we're going to see something like that. Age of Sigmar is built not out of static army books, though, but it's built out of collections of scrolls, and tomes gather them together into subsets, into sub-factions with their own unique rules. But there's a much more freedom to kind of build and build as you wish within a Grand Alliance, even across whatever you want. Actually, many of the organized circuit, many of even the local groups, just try to silo them within these Grand Alliances. But if you want to gain their special rules, you build within that sub-faction, whatever that battle tome says, or whatever rules it was given in the General's Handbook within that subset, which usually is just getting maybe another unit opened up or two for battle line core. But over time, those the newer stuff is going to be more interesting, and people are going to buy into that. This is an inclusive system, and forcing it to be an exclusive system is a choice. It's not a necessity. All right, let's go to the next one. The next one is about, I think it's overcosting. So this is Vince's next solution. It's about overcosting the Compendium Scrolls. I really believe this is a terrible solution. Even Vince said that he feels it's a terrible solution. Why? Again, who makes these rules? It's the organizers that are making these rules. And should they be the only deciding factor on this? I mean, these are legal, official models. They have rules. They have points. They should be legal in matched play. They've been put out, even in the General's Handbook, with points. And with all the ongoing, diminishing of their capabilities because of the lack of synergies, because of keyword issues, is it bold? Is it the right name? Has it been changed? Battalions no longer being capable. They're not even as competitive. They just maybe open up some small facet of synergy by being there with some other rule that you don't have in these incomplete, current sub-factions that were put together in the GHB. Some of them don't really even work by themselves. Just take a look at like Nighthaunt, where it has the black coach, which has stuff that enhances it if there's a presence of a wizard, but the sub faction doesn't have any wizards. So there's things like that are broken. There's plenty of the other examples of this. So it just doesn't seem logical. Okay, so there's always going to be a debate now on what's overpowered, what's undercosted. That's what points does. That is the pit of despair that points creates, even though it solves many other things. All right, but you can't achieve a 100% fairness in how points are determined, and everyone will never agree on what they feel the points should be, and what they feel is powered and overpowered. If this comes from anywhere, it needs to be official. It needs to come from from Games Workshop. If as in Games Workshop revises the points and the layout of these factions in a new General's Handbook, which is what they're kind of doing. This could be adjusted based on feedback from the wider community, not just based on what a tournament organizer or one tournament circuit decides. And they can make their own comp package. That's their right. They are running that event. They could turn everything upside down and incorporate their own rules. But GW invited us all to provide thoughts for the next General's Handbook. This is an engagement that I'm sure will include, obviously, the tournament organizers, but it's an open dialogue for the entire community to weigh into. And a community-driven change here will cause more confusion, not solve the problem. I think it's a bad option to just relegate it to, hey, let's make these units more costed, because then it's an opinion of a small segment of the community that affects everybody, and I don't think that's the way to go. All right, so I definitely disagree with that one. All right, moving on to the next one. And I believe that one is remove. Yes, it is. It is remove. Okay, remove the compendium entirely. Kick it out. Don't use it for match play. Only for local and casual plays or whatever you want to do in your own basement or at the local store. I've said this before. The same reasons. This is a bad option. I don't want to have to retread them. The very same reasons I said about the phase out is the same thing for this. So I'm just going to move on from this one. Bad option. Remove them entirely. Look, they're legal. They have points. If they're in the next General's Handbook, which I hope they are, then there's also going to be legal, and there's going to be more and more of these things as time goes on. But I really believe organically, just to put a punctuation on it, organically they're going to get phased out just because the game is going to evolve and move on. All right, next one. All right, formats. This is the very fleshed out, very well thought out series of solutions that Vince provided in terms of what he thinks that should be done. And from what I understand, he's actually even had a dialogue with people from the SCGT about these types of things. And this is very similar to what we see in a lot of organized games. Now, while I don't have Vince's experience with Magic, and just to give a little explanation of what he suggests, his suggestion is that there should be these formats. Modern is what's legal, the more current stuff. Legacy is, I guess, another tier. Vintage maybe anything, or maybe just the old stuff. I don't know. I don't know how that works, if that's what he was alluding to. But when you play, for instance, in Magic or any of these other collector games, obviously you have stuff that's very recent, and only that can be played. Only that can be played in those events, unless it's an event that that specifically says it's a legacy event. Look, again, as I said, I don't have Vince's experience with Magic. I have seen how this works in other collector games like HeroClix. I played that. My son has played it. That's kind of how I got in. I introduced him into it because there was math involved, and it helped him with adding and subtracting, really. And it was something cool to encourage him to do that because it was superheroes on the table and a game system. So it forced him to figure out how to add stuff to see if he hit or if something missed or how much damage was done. And it really worked, by the way. I highly encourage it. But you have kids. But the way it works is every 2 years, they relegate every release to a lesser and very infrequently run retired list. You don't see lots of events that include that retired list. And I'm sure that the way Vince described it, and what everybody else has described it, and what I'm familiar with in my limited experience with Magic, that's how they do it with Magic now. There's formats that only allow either old school stuff or the current stuff. Well, the old school stuff very rarely gets played. Okay, can you play the stuff that you want to play with, that you own now? Sure, you can. You could do that with Age of Sigmar. You could do that with any of these old games. But I got to tell you, the Golden Era stuff. We all know that organized events, their formats kind of bleed into casual play. They set the tone for what is mostly played at the stores. Sure, local groups can do things differently, but the stores run the vast majority of what is current. And card games like Magic are an open the pack and build a deck, and you're off playing. It is a very different thing with Age of Sigmar. I cannot emphasize this enough. You're not just opening a box and playing Age of Sigmar. There's a lot more that goes into it. It's a very personal experience. You build the models. It takes time to do that. If you're doing it right, you're moving mold lines and maybe filling in gaps. Maybe you're doing converting. That takes a tremendous amount of time. I can't begin to tell you. I spent over a year just converting my Bretonnian Undead, and I got to tell you, I'm still working on it. But this is a 4+ year project, but I spent probably a year just converting models, barely painting anything. And that's how much it can you can invest in this hobby doing it. Painting it up as you like takes time. If you just open the stuff out of the box, even if you don't clean up mold lines and stuff like that, you just open it up, slap it together with some plastic glue, and then just paint it. Even if you just do 3 color, it still takes time. All right, there's an investment in that. You're not just cracking open a box of HeroClix, opening up a pack of Magic, and going out and playing. It's a different type of investment. Pushing things like that to a retired list in a collector's game, in making it a collector's type game, is a bad move. You don't want to spend hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours making your army just the way you want it, just to have it phased out. And let's be realistic. There is, again, a huge divide between opening up a box of something and being able to play it right there, and maybe even getting lots of that, spending a huge investment of time in that, versus spending months, maybe even a year or two, getting a tournament level capable army, because we're talking about competitive play in a lot of respects. That is what this whole conundrum is about. Compendium in the organized circuit, competitive matched play. Should it be allowed? Should it be phased out? How does it impact it? Well, in order to get involved in that competitive circuit, you need to build and paint these armies. And that is no small task. No matter how fast you are, no matter how sloppy you are, there is a much more invested in doing that. All right? So just have it phased out when you're done, or shortly after, or a year down the road, it's just not a fair or reasonable thing to do, and there's just not enough reason to do it. Okay, even if you're not somebody who has a 10-year-old army sitting on your shelf, you might be somebody new or relatively new, or just within the past 4 or 5 years building up an army, and if this starts becoming the norm, suddenly that entire collection, or the vast majority of it, could become eliminated, and that's just not reasonable. If this happens, and it will occur, if it does happen, if this kind of situation occurs, it's going to start happening where the phase out becomes faster and faster, because the business model, if it's incorporated by Games Workshop, will force you to buy the new stuff, because suddenly every couple of years something is going to get retired. All right, it could be from the organized circuit that establishes it. But if it becomes a GW thing, which it isn't right now, but maybe GW is going to bow to the pressure, the same pressure that this community segment applied towards in trying to force some kind of a General's Handbook into the mix. Again, a lot of benefits that General's Handbook incorporated, vastly more than the detractions, but there were some detractions. There was certainly some rush stuff, some typos, other things like that. And bottom line is that's why they're going to be revising it. That's why I'm glad it's going to be kind of an evolving, living type of a thing, where every year or two they might try to incorporate a new one, which is good. I think it's good for the game. But the idea of then trying to have a tier of retired models periodically, if they incorporate something like that and they bow to that kind of pressure, we're going to see that happen more and more quicker. It's easier with card games like like Magic, and click games like HeroClix, and fantasy flight games like X-Wing or Armada. There's much less time put into fielding an army. So it's a vastly different impact to what happened with Magic and all the nerd rage and whatnot. And the alleviation of that nerd rage, because as Vince said in his video, even though the initial response was freak out, eventually it became a really good thing for Magic. But again, we're talking about a huge divide in what your investment is in a game like Magic and other games that provide this type of format versus what Warhammer is about, which is more of the hobby aspect, and then having what you built be suddenly unplayable in an organized format, especially if that's something you're interested in. Obviously, if you're not, who cares? If you're just a casual player, you're not going to care. But if you're invested in the organized circuit, if you think that your investment in that army was big now, think about it if that army has a shelf life of only a few years. And it may even take you only a few years to actually get it capable to be in a tournament. That's a big concern for me, and it should be a big concern for everybody else. It's not about nerds hating change, which is what Vince mentioned. Yeah, that's true. This is a true thing. This is a real thing. But what I'm saying is it's not about that nerds hating change. All right? We're talking about a different scale of investment. There are parallels to what he described. Absolutely sure. I like his points, and I agree with a lot of his points. But there's a massive divide in terms of what it takes to get that army, that list, that collection, tournament ready on the table for Age of Sigmar than with any of these other games. So let's go to our conclusion, all right? Because we'll talk about it, the conclusions that he brought up and what I'm suggesting. I'm very concerned with just the tournament organizers deciding what's legal. They have every right to. It's their events. But deciding what they can and cannot, when does that stop? Is it just that they decide that after a period of time, even if GW doesn't do it, all right, it's not an official thing. If then, and yeah, you could just say, oh, I'll decide not to go to that event. But if you want to get involved in the competitive scene, the idea that there's a small segment that is dictating what you can get involved with now. Maybe you wanted to get involved in a local scene, a regional scene, and that is what really is the biggest stuff in your area. Suddenly now, if in order you to keep doing that, you've got to keep purchasing new models, painting them up, and you're probably going to do that anyway if you're really invested in this hobby. But It's going to dictate what you build, what you buy, what your involvement is, how you build your list, what's legal. It's going to silo what's allowable based on just what these events are saying should be playable. So you're going to further skew what points is already skewing on what's powerful and what's capable and what's competitive. And that's just not something that I think that the organizers should dictate. Yes, I do agree that there's sometimes things that are overcosted, but that's the nature of points. There's sometimes things that are undercosted for their power. That's the nature of points. That is the thing that you have to live with if you want to live with a points environment in a competitive play scenario. That's why there's, it's a give and take. It's a double-edged sword. That's why I agree with it. I like that what points provides. I played, Warhammer over the course of the last 30 years with a nice break in the middle to build a family and have a child. But the bottom line is that the openness of what Age of Sigmar was without points also took a lot of that stuff away. It opened up some other problems, but it took some of that stuff away. But when you include points, you're going to have things that are overcosted, and it's just based on everybody's going to have different opinions on what is the right point structure. And the idea, that's a debate that is never ending, as if we don't need more debates in this community about various things. All right, but I think that it's certainly up to the local community what you guys want to play with, what you're comfortable with. You have, GW invites us all to ignore any rules that we wish and change any rules that we wish. But organized events imposing a comp, that's one thing. They have every right to do that, certainly. But taking it upon themselves, which is what they're going to do with this. This is what organized circuits are going to do if the community doesn't provide some pushback. They're going to take it upon themselves to allow and disavow what they feel is not effective. And that, where does that stop? I'm really concerned about where that stops. I'm not alarmist. I'm not trying to, my hair's not on fire. I'm not freaking out, but I just don't like having that be in the hands of a subset of the community, a very small subset. Yes, they are influential. They organize events. I organize events. But if you have somebody that goes into a store and buys a model, or even if they find a legal model that has points online or at an auction or in a collection, or they make a trade, I don't believe that should be relegated to a retired segment and then only play that, right? Because that becomes it's those guys over there doing that. It's not we're starting to subdivide our community then. And believe me when I tell you, if you do not go into a store and see the list of the events that are out for legacy, golden era, golden age events or whatever, versus the current stuff, and if it'll be a 10-to-1 skew, if not worse, in terms of what they consider current versus legacy. All right. So, and then try to imagine all the time that you put into building out your armies and painting up your models, and then realizing that their clock is ticking on all those things. It's already probably ticking, but it's organically ticking, not being forced by the opinions of some small few. Okay, so who really gets to make that call? I don't think that it should be that way. I think if there's points and if GW puts it out there, it should be playable. Different events will have different ideas, making it hard to collect what they want, forcing you into specific ranges of units and army lists dictated by someone else. This is not what Warhammer is about. This is not what the GW mandate is. It's about freedom of choice and being able to go and play what you want. You want to go into an organized event? Here's some guidelines. Here's some point structure. Can a TO reorganize that? Sure. But should they be saying, no, you can take this, but not that? I really don't feel that should be where that goes. And I'm really uncomfortable with any solution that puts the power of that into their hands. They can do it if they want. They can get away with it because they're offering up a service and you can choose not to participate. But I just don't feel that we should just blindly accept that. I think that we should try, and as many people did, and push back as many people did with SCGT and say, hey, we want to play this stuff. And they did. SCGT made a good call. They said, no, we'll allow it. We will allow these compendium scrolls, maybe just for now, but let's realize that, the clock is ticking on this stuff, sure. Why? Because eventually new stuff's going to come out. Better rules, better synergies, cooler models, and the other stuff's going to fade away. It's just what's going to happen organically. So I don't say necessarily do nothing. My conclusion isn't just do nothing. But I just don't want to, I really want to make sure that whatever is done is not an overreach, imbuing power over what the choice is into the tournament organizers. If there needs to be some some phasing out over the course of time. I think it really will happen naturally. Maybe there should be some structure, but I think we should be very careful about defining something, because let's also realize that what happens in Europe might not happen in the US, and what happens in the Northeast might not happen in the Midwest. All the different regions are going to have different types of rules then. And even if you try to make some kind of unifying rule, which is no small lift. I mean, even in the heyday of 8th edition, or in previous editions where there was an organized circuit, there are vastly different rules in different regions. And those types of rules can inhibit you to being able to participate because maybe you don't have a collection that's legal. All right. So what's somebody going to say? Oh, well, then go out and buy more stuff. Well, maybe I bought my stuff and I made my army and I'm not ready to buy more stuff. Now I got to wait. I got to buy something else. I got to paint it up, or some of, a good portion of my army is no longer legal. It does happen from edition to edition, but let's not accelerate it. Let's not force that hand. It'll happen. I just don't think that we need to make that happen intentionally and unnecessarily. And I don't think there's enough reason to do that. My conclusion is I don't think there's enough reason to overreach and overdo that to create those silos in the way that Vince described, in the way that he's not alone. I mean, he's got a good solution, better than a lot of ones that I've heard, I got to tell you. But I just don't think it's enough. I don't think that's the solution right there. I think it needs to be something else, and I think people need to chill a little bit about Compendium Scrolls. It's going to go away. It's going to fade away over time. I don't think we need to start kicking it out the door. It's like you don't need to unplug grandma, okay? All right, she's going to go into the eternal rest on her own one day. And I know that sounds very morbid and maybe not even appropriate, but I don't think we need to start digging graves here. All right, that's my my response. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and just be cordial and be respectful if you're going to make any input. Let's try to have a respectful dialogue. But I'd be happy and interested to hear your opinion, and I definitely encourage you to look into the other responses around the community that people are going to be putting out. Have a great day, everybody.